Hello, everyone, and today we're going to look at another horrific case with you. In the spring of 2016, a horrific and cunning murder occurred in the tranquil town of Fort Worth, Texas, shocking even the most experienced investigators. The victim of the crime was a young mother of several children named Elizabeth Paula Arellano, a paramedic, and you will be surprised to learn who executed her. The circumstances surrounding the tragedy were so odd that the authorities initially proposed the hypothesis that Elizabeth died voluntarily. However, such a scenario did not accord with the testimonies of those who were unintentional witnesses to the horrific event. The investigation had to work extremely hard to grasp everything and bring the culprit to justice. However, many people felt that the punishment he received was too mild and unfair, given the ferocity of the murder. Elizabeth Paula Arellano was born on August 16, 1987, in Fort Worth, Texas, where she would spend the rest of her brief life. She grew up with her two sisters, Alessandra and Giovanna, and they were absolutely inseparable. Elizabeth's birth father abandoned the family when she was quite young. He had no interest in his daughter's situation and did not contact her in any way. Her mother, Juanita, remarried to a guy named Fidel, who adopted her children and raised them as his own. Elizabeth had a close relationship with her stepfather, who encouraged and assisted her in everything. The girl studied hard in school and hoped to one day become a doctor. In high school, she met Rudolph Arellano, with whom she developed a romantic relationship. The young guy was over 8 years older than Elizabeth, which embarrassed her parents, but they did not interfere with her passion because the chosen daughter appeared to them to be a serious and dependable man. Elizabeth legally married her sweetheart when she was 16 years old and had just finished school. The couple has 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter. But, despite the emergence of several heirs, Elizabeth had no intention of becoming a housewife. Elizabeth remembered her childhood desire, so she graduated from medical school and worked as a paramedic, intending to further her study and become a doctor. The young woman was nice and spiritual, raised in Christian traditions. She took her children to church on a daily basis, teaching them to love and care for their neighbors. Family and friends described her as a very responsive person who was always willing to help. From the outside, their marriage to Rudolph appeared solid and happy. However, after 13 years of living together, their partnership began to physically fall apart. Rudolph had previously been envious of his young wife, attempting to control her in all aspects of her life, but his behavior had become unpleasant with time. Elizabeth moved the children to her parents' house in the spring of 2016, following another jealousy scene arranged by her husband. Rudolph attempted to reconcile with his wife, but the young woman had grown tired of his outbursts. Furthermore, she did not want the children to hear about the parents' scandals on a daily basis, so she had the guts to file for divorce. Elizabeth abruptly vanished just a few days after taking the children and filing for divorce. According to friends and relatives, she was in excellent spirits and chose to go to a neighborhood club with coworkers after work to divert herself from personal troubles and a minor divorce. So, on Friday evening, April 15, 2016, the 28-year-old young mother and her friends went to a fun spot. She danced and had a fantastic time there, but she didn't drink because she planned to drive home in the same automobile she used to get to the club. Elizabeth returned home well after midnight on April 16. After parking the car, she called her friend, with whom she had spent the night at the club, and informed her that she had arrived home safely. Elizabeth hung up the phone and never entered the house. Her mother was extremely concerned the next morning when she discovered her daughter was not at home. She knew Elizabeth was going to spend the evening with friends, but her daughter should have returned long ago. She couldn't depart unannounced, and her car was parked outside the home, indicating that Elizabeth had returned from the club. When Juanita approached the car, she discovered that it had not been locked. The key was still stuck in the ignition, and her daughter's pocketbook and mobile phone were inside on the seat. Naturally, she could not leave her personal items in an open automobile like that, implying that something dreadful had occurred. The wife quickly called the police to report a missing person. The police hoped they would be able to solve the case, which they referred to as hot tracks. Furthermore, there was still optimism that Elizabeth was alive because there was no blood or signs of fighting in the vehicle. But it wasn't so easy. The first step was to reconstruct in minute detail the chronology of the events of that evening and night, track Elizabeth's whole trip, and locate and examine any potential witnesses. First, the young woman's friends and colleagues with whom she had spent the evening before disappearing were interviewed. They supplied the precise moment she went home, and Elizabeth later called back to say she had arrived safely. In addition, multiple calls and messages from her ex-husband, Rudolph Arellano, who had repeatedly attempted to contact her that night, were discovered on the missing person's cell phone. But Elizabeth never responded. Police officers went to Rudolph's house to find out where he was and what he had been doing the previous evening and night. According to the man, he had just spoken with his ex-wife the night before, and she had agreed to bring the children to him for the weekend. But she then stopped answering the phone, leading him to believe she had changed her mind. Arellano's alibi was doubtful. He said he sat with a friend at a neighborhood tavern that evening and returned home at midnight to go to bed. His companion and numerous others who had been lounging at the same business on Friday confirmed Rudolph's presence, but no one knew where he went after that. The man stated that he had returned home, but because he now lived alone, there was no one to verify this. As a result, the police would not exclude Mr. Arellano from the list of suspects. Furthermore, he did not appear upset or worried. It was evident that he and Elizabeth were divorcing, but they had been married for many years. She was the mother of his children, and it was remarkable that her disappearance had had no effect on him. On the night a young mother went missing, a fisherman contacted 911 to describe a bizarre thing he witnessed. The man stated that he was sitting alone with a fishing rod on an interstate highway bridge when, around 4:30 in the morning, he noticed a car drive onto the bridge, come to a stop, and then pull out something large that resembled a person and threw it into the water. It also appeared to him that something huge and clearly hefty was attached to this individual. Because the fisherman was at a great distance, and it was still dark, he couldn't see specifics like the make and number of the car. Furthermore, there was a tremendous wind on bridge, preventing the man from hearing anything. Another witness was soon discovered walking his dog at night near the bridge. He didn't notice what was occurring on the bridge, but a sad scream drew his attention. Then he noticed something enormous flying down from the bridge, followed by a splash and quiet. Based on witnesses' evidence, the police decided to investigate the bottom of the pond near the bridge. A few hours later, divers discovered a body with a large block of concrete tied around its neck with a rope. The drowned woman was identified as Elizabeth Arellano, who had been missing. Without the testimony of a passerby and a fisherman, her body would have been discovered quickly, if not at all, because the tide weight prevented the body from floating. Then a narrative emerged in which the young woman voluntarily left her life due to family troubles. However, this notion was untenable because it contradicted the evidence of a witness who observed someone throw her into the sea, as well as the words of relatives who told Elizabeth that she had big ambitions for her life and would never do this to her children or parents. Elizabeth was still alive when a piece of concrete was tied around her neck and thrown from the bridge. This was supported by forensic medical reports indicating that the young woman suffocated, as well as testimony from a man who heard her desperate scream as she flew down the bridge. But who and for what cause might have cruelly murdered a woman with multiple children? Robbery was not suspected because none of Elizabeth's items were taken. There were suspicions that the killer saw Elizabeth in the club and followed her home, or that someone guarded her at home, waiting for her to return. The deceased's ex-husband insisted that he was sleeping at home on the night of the murder and had no involvement in the crime. However, the investigators were not in a hurry to remove Rudolph from the list of possibilities because he had no alibi and his actions generated more and more suspicions. At the funeral, the man performed an act. He wept at his ex-wife's coffin, stating he wished he could be in her place or die with her. According to his sister Elizabeth, she even believed his statements were sincere. In addition, Rudolph actively participated in the establishment of a charitable organization to generate cash for his wife's goodbye ceremony. But after the funeral, when the guy was called to testify again, he looked and behaved completely differently, as if nothing had happened in his life. Following a thorough review of all CCTV footage from Elizabeth's final route, it was discovered that a car of the same make and color as Rudolph's drove away from her parents' house around 3 a.m. The neighbor also remembered seeing the car parked on the road near the deceased's home. Their neighbor also recounted seeing the automobile parked on the road near the deceased's house. Furthermore, it was determined that the car had traveled towards the same bridge from which the woman had been thrown. This situation aroused numerous doubts, and when the inquiry requested Rudolph's cell phone data from the night of the crime, the suspicions grew even more. It turned out that the man made multiple calls that night, first near Elizabeth's workplace and then near the homes of his mother-in-law and father-in-law. He also sent many messages to his ex-wife, hoping to find out when she would return, but they went unanswered. He had apparently been following her and decided to wait for her at Elizabeth's parents' house. The police finally had enough evidence to arrest Rudolph as the primary suspect and take him to the station for additional questioning. Elizabeth and Rudolph's eldest son served as a key witness in the lawsuit. When the youngster was shown the rope that had been removed from his mother's neck, he indicated that he had seen it before in his father's backyard and remembered it well, since he had played with it. Furthermore, the youngster identified a piece of concrete that had been laying in their garden shortly after the fence had been restored. Rudolph's automobile trunk also had little shards of this concrete. The inquiry revealed that the man waited for his ex-wife at her parents' house and snatched her before she could enter. He forced her into his car, which he had already equipped with rope and concrete in its trunk. After that, he drove to the bridge for the massacre, hoping to go unnoticed. Rudolph Arellano was brought into custody 10 days after his ex-wife's body was discovered in the lake. Despite overwhelming evidence and witness testimony establishing his guilt, Rudolph denied any involvement in the incident and maintained that he was at home that night. Given the ferocity of his conduct, Rudolph faced the death penalty, but on the advice of his lawyer, he opted to confess and collaborate with the inquiry in order to reduce his sentence. Arellano pled guilty in court in January 2019, detailing how he kidnapped and murdered his ex-wife and the mother of their 4 children. Juanita fainted in court while listening to his story, and Alessandra and Giovanna referred to their sister's killer as Monster. Rudolph accepted his involvement but felt neither regret or qualms of conscience. He spoke indifferently and coldly about his murder, did not apologize, and did not explain the reason for his heinous deed. The murderer received a life sentence with no possibility of release. Elizabeth's family members, while considering such a sentence to be moderate, stated that they forgive Rudolph in order to keep their hearts from boiling with wrath. Her parents and sisters are now responsible for raising the deceased woman's children.